it's Romania Black, and yeah, I know I'm a little bit late talking about this, but this all started as I was doing my end of the evening doom scroll over on Twitter when I noticed a post garnering a lot of attention. What was this worst manga ever, and why were people so up in arms about this one image? Well, 2 weeks and 380 chapters later, this girl has read Rent a Girlfriend, so you don't have to. Obviously, before we start, there is going to be a lot of spoilers for this series, so I'm going to try to keep it vague enough in case if you're inclined to go and see for yourself. But I chomped through 380 chapters of this manga in a solid 2 or so weeks. The last time I sorted through a manga this quickly was in the winter of 2014 when I was bedridden from the flu and power read through the entirety of Naruto in a medicated haze. So yeah, I was curious to see why this manga's latest chapters were receiving negative reception, to find out why the haters were hating, but also to be informed about this series that when I brought it up, my brother went, ugh. And if I'm going to do a video essay on this, then the teacher in me demands that it be researched. So after a few weeks of steamrolling through this series, what is the general consensus? Is this series a massive pile of garbage? Are there any redeeming qualities? And are there lessons we should be learning as a prospective audience and casual readers? Well, if this were a test in my class, the answer would be all of the above. Rent a Girlfriend is a manga series by Reiji Miyajima that has been published since 2017 with 40 volumes. Yes, I read 40 volumes in 2 weeks with this series, and it was a roller coaster. I will say the first third of this series made me irritated. But then I started to open up and think, hey, this could be making some interesting commentary. And then the last third just morphed into me as the mob from Monty Python and the Holy Grail begging the series to get on with it. So the story revolves around Kazuya Kinoshita, and Kazuya starts out as your generic loser character. He's broken up with his girlfriend of only 1 month. He's mooching off of his parents and has no job, and he doesn't seem to have hardly any friends. His solution to his girlfriend breaking up with him is to take a deep introspection into himself, to reflect on the decisions that have led him to this state. And now I'm just kidding. He finds a girlfriend rental service and decides to rent a girlfriend to make himself feel better. And lo and behold, falls head over heels with her. Now, Kazuya is definitely an author's darling. You know how sometimes authors have characters that they say they're their favorites, but they love to abuse them throughout the story. And then there are characters like here where the authors clearly loathe them and are trying to go out of their way to explain how traits that should make you want to avoid them at all costs in the real world would be perfectly normal and acceptable, even desirable. So he's someone that would benefit from several sessions of self-reflective therapy and from reading Bloom Into You, and also from fixing his damn phone screen. Seriously, he never fixes it. The entire manga to this day, 380 chapters later, doesn't fix the phone screen. Every time you look at his phone, it's a cracked phone screen. And he doesn't have the self-dignity, self-funds to go fix this cracked phone screen. That alone would have justified Mizuhara not dating him. That alone would justify it. But anyway, the woman that Kazuya rents for his date is Chizaru Mizuhara, though her actual name is Chizaru Ichinose. She's basically Summer from 500 Days of Summer. And, you know, describing Kazuya as Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character in this movie is probably not unreasonable, although Joseph Gordon-Levitt had a job. So, Mizuhara works for a rental dating service that allows men to pay for sexless dates with a woman that they basically just flaunt around in public. And Mizuhara is definitely living out her Missy Elliott life, you know, with her job. Ain't no shame, lady, do your thing. Just make sure you're ahead of the game. Now, at the start of this series, Kazuya gives Mizuhara a bad rating on the app for her service because he didn't think she was being authentic with him. And this is going to be a big point in this series. And when he stumbles across her again, she berates him for it. And because, it could hurt her business, gives him a hard time. And her outburst makes Kazuya realize, oh my God, she's an actual person. And before anything else can occur, he finds out that his grandmother has been hospitalized, and through a series of shenanigans that would be the staple of any typical rom-com setup, he brings Mizuhara to the hospital, and the grandmother thinks that they're actually dating and falls in love with Mizuhara as a potential girlfriend for her grandson. And to keep up appearances, Kazuya decides to keep renting her as his girlfriend to fool his family. Now, one of my favorite farces has always been Not Another Teen Movie. It makes fun of so many rom-coms from the United States in the late 90s, early 2000s. And one of my favorite gags from said parody makes fun of the American film She's All That, and how the superficial main love interest judges the protagonist based on her appearance before her glow up.
Guys, she's got glasses and a ponytail. Look at that. She's got paint on her overalls. What is that?
So yeah, Kazuya doesn't realize that his rental girlfriend is also his classmate and neighbor at first because of her insane disguise of black-rimmed glasses and pigtails. I mean, even Sailor Moon and Clark Kent at this point are more incognito than Mizuhara. Anyway, so you have the Big Bang Theory setup of hot girl next door, who just happens to also be the girlfriend that you're renting for dates and that you've fallen head over heels for. This is going to be important later, primarily because she's hot. If you're someone that cringes at the sight of late 20th century panty shot fan services and characters awoogaing over the slightest boob curvature, then your body will probably look like the Fibonacci sequence by the time you're done reading this series. One thing that stays constant is that even despite Kazuya's proclaimed love of Mizuhara, every female character that remotely shows some skin gets him honing in and having near to full-on boners in public. And while I appreciate this show showing a man being himself and masturbating and not shying away from real human reactions to physical attractiveness, if your goal is to convince us that Kazuya is the perfect soulmate for Mizuhara, showing us that just any old hottie is gonna get this boy's motor running is probably not the best way of convincing us that that's true. So we'll talk about that infamous chapter 380 soon enough. But as I said earlier, this series had me in 3 emotional stages while reading. The first stage and the first third of this series just irritated me. Mainly Kazuya irritated me, and I have no problem with him starting out as this aspirationless blob that's mooching off of his parents and has no job or end goals, because you know what? That is a lump of clay that a mangaka can mold. You can give your audience the rock bottom, bare bones shell of a man and then let the story shape him into this developed character that the audience is rooting for. And the only thing is, he doesn't really grow that much throughout the story. He's not a grower. Don't get me wrong. He does get a part-time job, we think. We never really see him at said part-time job, but we hear about it in the story. In the first third, when he starts to run low on cash that his parents have been giving him because he's using it all on a rental girlfriend. But now, sure, he gets a boner just being in the same space as Mizuhara, and he can't help it. He's just a guy, and that happens. And we find out he's a sensitive soul, a romantic who would put his lover above himself and sacrifice everything he had for that person. The problem is, that's how he reacts to every woman around him. Mizuhara is supposed to be the love of his life. She's the one, she's the perfect person for him and the woman who's going to be the best wife, the best girlfriend, the mother of his children, etc. However, if his ex-girlfriend just happens to come around in a skimpy skirt and a tight tube top, who is Kazuya to not sneak a peek at her ample bosom? If another rental girlfriend, after seeing Kazuya say one nice thing about Mizuhara, falls desperately in love with him and sets him up to be her actual boyfriend, who is he to deny her the right to claim that and parade around him so he can gaze sharply at her shapely form, let her kiss him, tell others they're dating, even though he still loves Mizuhara way more than everyone? Yeah, this is a harem manga. But it's not even a good harem manga. I've not read a lot of harem mangas, other than like Ouran High School Host Club. But when I see harem manga, I think of the main character as having an equitable view of all the love interests. And maybe there's one they zero in on, but they equally love for other reasons the others, say like in the game Harvest Moon or in Free Iwatobi Swim Club. If you're feeling up for a sweet character, you might pick Potpourri or Makoto. And if you're feeling angsty, you might pick Karen or Reen. Regardless, harems are supposed to have various characters you would like equally, just depending on the situation. In this series, your options are A. Chizaru Mizuhara. I'm going to talk about her more in detail as we go, but she's the female character we probably spend the most time with and is the flawed beauty that Kazuya is in love with unconditionally, even before he knows anything about her. She's an orphaned girl who is working as a rental girlfriend while going to school and trying to become an actress and taking care of her ailing grandmother, and all that's going to come into play later on. 2, there is Mammy, who is an abomination in the first part of this story. The first third of this story, I hated her as much as Daisy from The Great Gatsby, and it takes a special brand of trollop to draw up as much frustration as that blonde harlot. But Mammy is the stereotypical, I broke up with him, but I actually love him and I'm jealous of any girl who looks at him romantically because it should have been me, even though I'm the one that called the relationship off. She does have a moment where I respected her later on in the story, but for the most part, she is vain, she is conniving, and Kazuya deserves her because she can't make any progress as a character in this story, much like him. Sumi is an actual angel, and she's really just in the story to serve as an emotional support friend for Kazuya and Mizuhara when they need her. I expected her to be more of a love interest in this, but she's barely in the story, and when she is, it's just to pad time and offer this sweet alternative to the garbage relationship drama that's describing itself as the plot. Then there is Mine, who is an ace-coded aromantic cosplayer who becomes Kazuya's wingman in pursuing Mizuhara. And in true male fantasy wish fulfillment, she calls Kazuya Master and basically tells him he's amazing and doesn't understand why Mizuhara wouldn't date him. I would say I call her ace-coded and aromantic because she's basically Maki from Bloom Into You in that regard. She doesn't want to be in a relationship herself, but would rather watch Kazuya attain his ultimate girlfriend from the sidelines. The problem with her is that she is really one-sided in that she thinks Kazuya is amazing, and while she does chide him for some of his slip-ups, she also is part of the gaslighting brigade to Mizuhara, and we'll talk about that, as we go. But she tells Mizuhara that every one of her customers has the potential to give her a lifetime of happiness, but she should focus on Kazuya. She even calls Mizuhara as being prim and proper annoying to Kazuya, and as if it were her business. And while I get that she's likely calling Mizuhara out for not being genuine while being in rental girlfriend mode, that's the point. She's on the clock, and Kazuya is not her actual boyfriend through all of this, so why would she expect to be any different around him? Otherwise, Mine is a good character, but there are a lot of sexualizing shots of her boobs and butts that are really uncomfortable throughout this, because given that she has no interest in Kazuya and Kazuya has no real supposed interest in her, it feels like the mangaka is taking advantage of a character and showing us these facets of her literally without her consent. And it's weird. Then there's Ruka. Finally, our fifth. There's Ruka, and she is probably the character I sympathized the most with for a while. She starts out as a rental girlfriend herself, but after seeing Kazuya be a kind-hearted guy, she develops this crush on Kazuya and asks him out, which he accepts. Actively, he says he has a crush on Mizuhara, so one would think that if he loved Mizuhara, truly, he would break up with Ruka and pursue her, except he doesn't. Now, he keeps dating Ruka, calling her his girlfriend to the point where Kazuya's grandmother is starting to get convinced, and to his credit, because I know the comments below will say this, he does ask to break up with her as he starts to get more serious about Mizuhara. However, Ruka also tells him, no, I'm not breaking up with you, which is hilarious. And of course, this is all ridiculous. And Kazuya sits Ruka down, explains firmly that he is not romantically interested in her and wants to end their relationship so he can pursue the woman that he loves. No, he doesn't do that. He doesn't have the balls to make Ruka understand that they're not dating. He just keeps the title between them because it's more convenient that way. And this was all established in barely 200 chapters of the series. And by this point of reading, I was like, I can tell you right now, Mizuhara is not going to date this man as long as he is technically someone else's girlfriend. But I digress. To Mizuhara's credit as well, at the start of this series, she tells Kazuya she is not going to date a client and that a rental girlfriend is not the same as a real one. She straight up says that Kazuya should have admitted he liked her early on in order to make a difference with her wanting to date him. She questions what love actually is to the point that it's very clear Mizuhara is not secure in being in a relationship with anyone. She says she doesn't like Kazuya, but she doesn't not like him, so she's clearly conflicted in how she feels about him. She throws him constant hints, like telling him that his wife would be happy with him, questioning whether Ruka is suited to meet his family, and to Kazuya's credit, he does say that, yeah, Ruka's nice, but he wants his family to meet someone that he's really in love with, which, now break up with Ruka and ask Mizuhara out. But we don't get that. So it's been clear since the early part of the series that Mizuhara is not interested in Kazuya, but everyone around her is gaslighting her into staying in that relationship. The best friend, who thinks they are legit dating at the start of the series, says he's the best guy that she would ever possibly be with, which is just, that's what any best friend would say about their best friend to a potential partner. Let's be real. Mine is praising everything Kazuya does. The grandparents of Mizuhara and Kazuya are now besties, and they're practically planning their wedding, their future children's daycare services, everything without their consent. And everyone is telling Mizuhara that she should date this guy who, aside from being not an asshole, really doesn't have a lot of qualities that any other nice guy wouldn't have. So, what makes Kazuya so special? Now, it's around the second part of the story, though, that Mizuhara seems to be doubting herself and wondering, she's leaning into the gaslighting, and she stalls breaking off Kazuya officially as a client, which, to Kazuya's credit, he does ask her to quit stalling, which good for him, and asks whether she really likes him or not. But she feels that calling off their fake relationship is going to put strain on her actual grandmother's health because she hasn't brought up the courage to reveal to her grandmother that it's all a lie. And Kazuya is offering support to Mizuhara, offering to lend her an ear, offering to fund a film that she wants to do to give to her grandmother. And she doesn't really know what to do with this except to accept it because, someone's offering to support you and help you. So why wouldn't you? And plus, Kazuya's grandmother and mother at this point have given Mizuhara a heirloom engagement ring because they think that she's dating him and that she's going to be his wife, which she feels guilty about, and you can't really blame her. But Kazuya is not, blameless in all of this. Even though Mizuhara is flip-flopping back and forth this time and wrestling with a lot of emotions, Kazuya has this constant back and forth of, whether or not he's going to question, does she like him or not? And neither of them at the midpoint of the story can give a legit answer. But Kazuya at least starts to come around and he's like, yes, I love you. Do you love me? And to his credit, Mizuhara can't answer him directly and is very wishy-washy about it. And I'm like, girl, just dump him and move on if you don't like him. But again, I can understand because unlike Kazuya, who has a supportive family network and a stable upbringing, Mizuhara has lost her family entirely, and her leaving behind a self-described support network, which is what Kazuya has made himself at this point in the manga, would in all actuality be pretty hard. However, everyone finally finds out about Kazuya and Mizuhara's rental girlfriend setup, and to help Kazuya save face, because at this point he is about to reap what he is sowing, and I was really excited to see him reap what he has sown. To help him save face, because he's a nice guy and she wants to be supportive back to him and reciprocate the support that he's given her, she kisses him in public and doubles down on being his actual girlfriend. So a lot of mixed signals at this point. And it's frustrating because the whole time I'm frustrated for Mizuhara for being cornered and not knowing what to do and being indecisive. And I'm frustrated that Kazuya is still dating Ruka through all of this, while also oogling his ex-girlfriend through all of this. And there is a whole chapter at the midpoint of where I was reading that they're at a beach resort, by the way, when all of this goes down with them finding out about the rental girlfriend business. There is a whole chapter where the guys that are friends with Kazuya, they're just ducking in and out of the water so that they can see the female characters' hooters and cooters. And I had to read 380 chapters of this. So anyway, Mizuhara stalls by saying that she needs time to figure out and do research to see if she really wants to be in a relationship with Kazuya. And Ruka and Mammy do call her out about it. It's the one time I like Mammy as a character. She calls her out and says, "What are you doing, girl?" But she doesn't change course. And unlike what some people on social media may tell you, there is a lot going on under the surface with Mizuhara. They get kicked out of their apartments because they end up becoming condemned. And we're going to talk about that later. She's dealing with the death of her grandmother and mourning it. She's wondering if she's going to be able to quit her job and become a successful actress and survive if she starts dating Kazuya. More on that in a minute. But she's got a lot going on. And while her indecisiveness frustrates me a lot in the second act, I can kind of get where she's coming from. And that becomes more apparent as we go on the emotional journey into the third act. Throughout this series, I have been irritated and then hopeful and then frustrated. And then there was the final stage. As I'm recording this, chapter 380 is the current chapter the series has translated into English. And it is the culmination of literally 50 plus chapters of setup concerning this date that Kazuya finally gets the courage to ask our rental girlfriend out on. So let's get into this. So Kazuya and Mine plan out this date for him and Mizuhara. They're going to go out, get food, go to amusement park. Standard, pretty go-to good first official date. Of course, he finds out later that Mizuhara has been on this same date setup with like 7 other guys because she's a rental girlfriend and that's what she does. And they all had the same idea. But, you know, she has good humor with it. She goes along and she actually does do some things that she says she didn't do with her other dates. So it ends up being a good time. They do this compatibility test and, of course, the mangaka has them get 100% compatibility, which she seems kind of frustrated by because she had had all these talks with her grandmother before she died. And the grandmother, because she didn't know it was all a farce, her and Kazuya was like, "Oh, Kazuya is perfect for you. I think you guys are 100% compatible." And Mizuhara has been wrestling back and forth with that. So getting this 100% compatibility, she tells Kazuya, is like her grandmother winning, even though she didn't know the full scope of everything. And again, we're going to talk about all of this in a minute about this obligation, but a lot is going on that we're going to have to come back to. But the point of the date is, at the climax of it, she asks Kazuya, "Why do you like me? Why are you in love with me?" And it's clear she's getting to the idea of, do you love me, Chizaru Ichinose? Or do you love Mizuhara, the perfect rental girlfriend? And Kazuya cannot give her an answer that isn't just surface level beyond physical appearance. She has great boobs, perfect legs, ethereal physical charms. But his go-to of why he loves her isn't her personality or her identity or attitude that draws him to her. And while the frustrating thing is he has talked about these aspects of her in previous individual chapters, when it counts, when she's asking him, the first thing and only thing that comes to his mind he can respond with is, "Oh, you're hot." And that's what he responds with. So at the end of the date, Mizuhara says that she's had a great time. He's a nice guy. And she admits finally that she may love him. But after the month they've lived together, which, yes, we're going to get more into detail with that, I promise, she acknowledges that the responsibility she feels with the literal engagement ring that she's been given has led her to come to find out she's not ready to wear it yet. She feels guilty about deceiving her grandmother, which she has not resolved and came to a resolution with. She has not been able to forgive Mammy, who has harassed their relationship this entire series. She doesn't want to be involved when Ruka is still actively claiming to be his girlfriend and he hasn't taken care of that. And she says that despite possibly having feelings for him, quote, "Considering her current lifestyle, her work, and everything else, I don't think that a relationship with you is something I can jump into right now." And she apologizes and bows to him. And considering everything surrounding her in this moment, it's a respectable decision. And as Kazuya has said before, he's going to keep supporting her. And he walks her home after the date. And the fandom is like, yeah, that seems like a legit decision that we've seen coming for 380 chapters. Yeah, everybody else lost their minds about this chapter. And regardless of what gaslighting and future drama this mangaka puts their fandom through, this chapter was a definitive checkpoint. But honestly, is it worth the hate? What should we be taking from this series as a whole? So in one of the earlier chapters in the series, Kazuya says that even if their relationship ends, he'd still support her for the rest of his life because of how much she means to him. And that earns him praise and approval from Mizuhara's grandmother. Another scene is a bartender telling him, quote, "A man's purpose is to be there for women and to never forget it," which impacts him making that statement to Mizuhara later on. And Kazuya says that not being there for her would make him a terrible boyfriend and a terrible man. So at the end of chapter 380, does Kazuya accept her decision and support her and walk her home to finish the date? No. He says, "Oh, well, that's life. Oh, well," plays it off as a joke through his sheer disappointment and walks away, leaving behind Mizuhara, who notices that her ankles are literally like blistered and cut up from walking so much, which, girl, relatable. I feel for you. What happened to that support? Or is it only as long as the woman on the other side is going to reciprocate? Kazuya acknowledges that they really don't have a real relationship and he wants to change that. And he does offer emotional support on a base level for Mizuhara. But when she can't answer the question of whether she loves him or not, just because you love someone does not mean that relationship is going to be successful. Because here's the thing. There was a phrase called, "If you love someone, you let them go." And Kazuya has clearly never heard that phrase before. Honestly, while Mizuhara's loftiness and fragility in her conviction towards her and Kazuya's relationship is annoying, it is not her duty to commit to the relationship with Kazuya. And Kazuya should, in all honesty, read her hesitance to being in a relationship as a sign for him to, quote unquote, let her go and distance himself until she's ready to give him an honest answer. But instead, he forges ahead, he pushes her into a corner, while simultaneously continues to purchase dates from her, so she is forced to spend time with him rather than to come to him out of her own sincere desire to be with him. And Mizuhara declaring that she is not in the right place to be in a relationship in chapters 380 is understandable given what all she has going on with her throughout this series, which we're finally going to talk about. And if Kazuya was as observant as he claims to be in this series, he should respect her decision, give her the space, and not make it all about himself. I think one of the big problems, though, is that he has nearly been suffocating her throughout this entire series. He has been buying her dates, staying with her at her house, etc. And I know that Mizuhara did let Kazuya stay with her. Mine was there as well. Their apartments become condemned, and the three of them need a place to stay, and she lets them stay with her. And she did accept his offer to help her make a movie for her and her grandmother, and he helped her crowdfund for it, which is great. But he pushed for that to be a thing. So it's not her fault that someone was begging her to let them help, and she accepted. Because just because someone does you a good favor, it doesn't mean that they owe you anything. Love is not a transaction. So let's get back to this. What stressors are affecting Mizuhara throughout the series that would make her question dating Kazuya in chapter 380? Well, first, there's the death of her grandmother. The fact that her grandmother died without knowing that Kazuya was a client, and the fact that Mizuhara has no family left alive to serve as a support system. She is alone at this point in the story. 2, Kazuya helped her raise money for a film so that she could show her grandmother her acting skills before she died, and that was an incredible act of kindness. But that does add stress to Mizuhara of having accepted that help and the possible guilt of not reciprocating that person's kindness or not knowing how to show the gratitude in an equatable format when Kazuya was a paying client at the time. And we'll get more into that in a moment, promise. 3, the apartments they lived at were condemned, and so both Kazuya and Mine stay at Mizuhara's house that she inherited from her late grandmother to have a place to stay. However, we don't know if Kazuya or Mine are going to stay in that house for an extended period of time, so that leaves Mizuhara with the struggle of maintaining the house, of paying for said maintenance, or having to take care of the house and, dispose of it and move somewhere else, and all of the responsibilities that come along with that. Because again, while Kazuya in the manga is like, oh, I couldn't possibly live at home with my parents or grandmother right now, which was giving me a lot of Reality Bites and Rent vibes through and through, the fact of the matter is he is privileged enough to have those resources available that he can fall back on. Mizuhara does not. 4, Mizuhara is a college student who is doing the rental service to pay her bills. Her career choice is acting, which, granted, Kazuya doesn't even have a career option lined up for after school, which, okay, but she's worrying about paying the bills with a not stable career choice. And if she dates Kazuya, she has said that she would have to stop being a rental girlfriend, which, good for her. That's the right thing to do. You don't want to be a rental girlfriend while you're actually dating someone. But I think a big part of her decision in chapter 380 to me was her wanting to get her life in order before deciding to just date someone she likes or she thinks she likes, and to make sure there is stability there and that it's not going to be a problem later on if something happens. 5, she even asks Kazuya during the date what he plans to do 3 to 5 years down the road, and he doesn't know. This guy has to convince himself earlier on in the series that he needs to brush his teeth more than once a day to keep up appearances while living with Mizuhara, which, ew, he has no career aspirations, no way of providing or proving that he can be financially stable, and is so spontaneous and live in the moment, which is not necessarily a problem. But Mizuhara tells him directly during the date, she's like, I need someone with a plan and some order, because I don't have it. And I'm not calling it a bad thing that Kazuya is not obsessed with money. That's not the bad thing. But I am going to call bullshit on this 100% compatibility unless it's that they're both whirlwinds of chaos and instability. But him having the privilege works for him. He has a support network. He can fall back on mommy and daddy's money if he needs to. But she doesn't want to rely on him for that. And I don't blame her for wanting to get her life in order and have some knowledge of stability before she gets in a relationship. And I don't think it's right for the mangaka to paint that as a bad thing. And that leads us to this idea of abusing reciprocity. Kelly Deals in her 2016 article posited, quote, if someone offers us a gift, we feel compelled to accept it and compelled to reciprocate. If we either refuse the gift or fail to reciprocate, we feel deeply uncomfortable. The reason? We violated a social contract. Our human social programming insists on a subterranean psychological level that we participate in this sequence once it's activated. She goes on to say that once you receive, you are in a sequence in which you feel compelled to reciprocate. When some people talk about the essential or divine nature of women, they often say one of the characteristics of femininity is being receptive. In the broadest caricature of masculinity and femininity, men do and women receive. In other words, men trigger the reciprocity sequence in women. Now, I know that this is from nearly 10 years ago, and it's a somewhat dated article because our concepts of gender constructs and the norms of giving and taking have been challenged over several years. And there's lots of articles that would posit that. But I think it's particularly relevant to this series because, like the bartender telling Kazuya that it's his job to provide, he goes head on into that, headstrong 120% throughout this manga, and it presents Mizuhara with this idea of, well, I've been given all these things, now it's my job to give back, and how do I do that? And she's uncomfortable with the idea of giving back because of what that could entail. The article goes on to say that men offer a gift so that women will reciprocate. In this broad interpretation of femininity, to be a woman is to be receptive. To receive means being obliged, compelled by the reciprocity, aka our deep social programming towards justice, to reciprocate. And this equivalence, femininity means being receptive, means that when men offer women a gift, they are obliged to reciprocate, whether they wanted the gift or not. Consent and desire are irrelevant. Entitlement and automatic obligation govern this sequence. Now, the article concludes by saying that this leads to rape culture. Now, do I think Kazuya is going to assault Mizuhara? No, not at all. However, the concept is proposed to him by his friend, who straight up tells him earlier on in the manga that it is perfectly acceptable to expect to have sex by the end of their first date at the theme park because of how much he's given to her so far, and because of who he is as the protagonist story, which does tie to this concept. Mizuhara, by the design of the industry that she works in, has become caught up in this cycle of, quote, men give me money and I give them a good time. And Kazuya's behavior throughout the entire series takes that reciprocity cycle and is trying to say, yeah, that, and now I'm the only one you do that with. And there's sex. A tweet from Anime Rave pointed out that Kazuya supposedly spent approximately $250,000 on Mizuhara over the course of dating her, which sucks for him because he could have just saved all that money if he had asked her out at the very beginning. However, one page of the manga stands out to me where Mine asks Kazuya how much money he spent on Mizuhara, and when he whispers in her ear, her response is, "Oh my gosh, that is so manly." A lot of websites I discovered when I researched and talked about how reciprocity is important for relationships, they talk about how they're important for thriving and sustaining, but all of the ones I came across were focused on emotional reciprocity. Nothing financial was mentioned, and all of them noted how both partners have to come at the relationship from a mutual investment. And as we can see in this series, Kazuya and Mizuhara, or Ichinose rather, are not mutually invested. I've called her Mizuhara throughout this entire video because as of right now, that's how she refers to herself. She is not being her true self. She is still under the persona of being the rental girlfriend, and Kazuya has yet to really tell her that he wants to invest in knowing Ichinose rather than the perfect rental girlfriend he originally developed the crush for. Again, he should really read Bloomin' to you, but that's neither here nor there. A lot of people on social media have commented, what? So you thought you could buy love? Or what? You're surprised that a girl you rented isn't going to love you back? And this series is a bit more complicated than those generalizations, but one of the main takeaways about reciprocity is how love can become tied to transactions. And I'm not just talking monetarily because Kazuya isn't expecting money back from Mizuhara. That's not the point. But no one's playing J-Lo's Love Don't Cost a Thing here either, because instead, Kazuya has offered emotional support to Mizuhara, whether she asked for it or not, because he offered to fund her movie, which, was his idea in the first place, and because he's literally said to her, quote, "I will wait until you love me," to her, by providing her time, money, and offers of emotional support. The author is telling us that Mizuhara is in the wrong if she doesn't reciprocate and return his love to him in the form of dating him and possibly even marrying him and dedicating her life to him. And that line, "I will wait until you love me," is probably the biggest red flag in the whole series. Because I wouldn't describe Kazuya as a stalker, though that line could definitely belong to one. I wouldn't describe Kazuya as an abuser, though that line could definitely belong to one. But the line itself is proposing this idea of, I will wait and you will eventually get to my level. And that is not a realistic expectation for anyone. And if readers who have absorbed 40 volumes of this manga over 8 years are reading with Kazuya in their minds as a protagonist to look up to, that is leading to an unhealthy mentality about romance and expectations that are not in sync with the actual world of relationships. Courtney S. Beatty with Psychology Today said in a 2025 article on low reciprocity relationships that when your partner is not matching your energy output, the solution is threefold. First, decrease the investments to balance where the energy is coming from. 2, focus on your freedom and self-love and direct kind gestures towards yourself. 3, there are 8 billion people in the world that you should direct energy towards. Not only yourself, better yourself and your relationships with others, and that will lead you to find someone that matches that energy. Kazuya is all give, 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 but it is so overwhelming that Mizuhara cannot keep up, and thus she feels pressured from not being able to reciprocate, and it hinders her wanting to attach to a relationship that she feels inadequate in. Kazuya rarely in this series focuses on his own freedom, space, or self-love. His kind gestures are all directed towards others. His best friend tells Mizuhara that Kazuya is the type who is going to love their partner 120% and give all of themselves. But then there's that question of how healthy is that? It feels like Scott Pilgrim, where you want to tell Kazuya, you need to love yourself first. As RuPaul says, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? And Kazuya really needs time to help himself. And as of 380 chapters in this manga, that's not been allowed to happen. Finally, one noticeable aspect about this series with Mizuhara and Kazuya is they don't really have friends. They isolate themselves to each other, and that is not healthy with the current dynamic that they have. Kazuya has a best friend, but he never hangs out with him at all. Instead, he hangs out with Mine 80% of the time because she validates all of his decisions and is a total yes person, whereas his self-described best friend does at least challenge him, but they're rarely together, maybe twice in this whole manga. And when not with those two, there's Mami and Ruka chasing him, but they're not friends, they're just basically love interests. Then there's Mizuhara, who's even worse. Except for Sumi's rare pop-in, she doesn't have any friends. People are either jealous of her good looks, or she's just an empty date in a rental service. Where do we go from here? Well, as of right now, Chapter 381 has come out, and it seems like Kazuya just mopes around and has accepted his fate, but he's about to run into Mizuhara at the end of the chapter, and yeah, it's like watching a car crash. I could see people continuing to read because they're either masochists and want to torture themselves week to week, or they just want to see how long this mangaka is going to continue to milk this cow on this poorly paced series. But I think I'm done after this. I will say, if you are reading this series and expecting to get the same type of reciprocity from people in real life that Kazuya is expecting here, don't. Just don't. There are so many good romance series out there. I know I'm biased. I know I'm a major BLGL fan. But you know what? While Yaoi and Yuri get a bad rap for being all spiciness and no plot, there is a lot more sexiness in those series than this one. And it's a lot more well done. And there are so many series out there that focus on legit romantic issues. They delve into hard relationship subject matters. They present their characters with respect and various perspectives that are enjoyable to read. This series, I imagine it's like that junk food snack that's like your go-to. It's not healthy for you and you know it, but it's easily digestible. It doesn't require a lot of work to consume, but is it good for you in the long run? There is so much more I could say about this series, and I have devoted way too many weeks to reading nightly chapter after chapter of this, but I'm probably going to move on from here and read some better series. There are several up on my channel now. Shameless plug of the day. But I need to say goodbye to this series and just keep up as people complain on social media. Hopefully, though, you have learned a little from this dive into 380 chapters of Rent a Girlfriend, and you don't have to waste time on it as I have. I am curious to know your thoughts down below. I hope you have enjoyed this video essay. There is a lot about reciprocity and relationships. People have lots of opinions about them, but this is not the series to model your ideas of relationships out of. And if this is just a guilty fantasy to you, that's cool, but it really, I don't think, deserves the notoriety that it may get. I don't know. But there's a lot better out there, and I think I'm going to focus on that from now on. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video essay. I can't wait to hear your thoughts down below. My name's Romania Black, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, go check out my channel. I'll be back real soon with a lot more reactions to some actual good series. See you there.